Hey, this is Mansab, and you're listening to Simply Wild. You know, I always been that guy, the one who loves a good story. I started as a writer, then became a wildlife researcher, and out there in the field seeing incredible things, I realized something. So many amazing stories, especially from wildlife, history, and nature, they get locked up. So that's why this podcast exists. Here, history gets wild, and the wild gets a history. What if I told you that one single animal might have shaped the history of India more than any king, any winner of wars? It was a living battle tank, a holy symbol, the star of every royal parade. And trust me, this story reveals more about us than you can imagine. Namaste, Adab, and a very warm welcome. You are here for Simply Wild, and welcome to our first ever series, the season 1 Wildlife in History. Every week this season, we are diving into stories where animals weren't just a part of the landscape, they were shaping empires, leading revolutions, and sometimes stopping kings in their tracks. And for our opening tale, we are going big, like 5-ton armored battle elephant big. So, the Hathi, the Indian elephant. Long before steel and gunpowder changed how wars were fought, this creature was the top giant of the Indian land, a force of nature used by humans with big plans. For thousands of years, its shadow fell across battlefields, and just having them around showed how powerful a king was. To understand ancient India, you really need to understand the elephant. So, when the kingdoms fought, the winner wasn't always decided by the sharpest of swords or the bravest men or the army. It often came down to one simple question. अच्छा, उसके पास कितने हाथी हैं? That number wasn't just a number. It was a big statement. It scared off enemies. It was the difference between a small kingdom and a ruling family that lasted for ages. So, how was this living earthquake controlled? How were these four legged giants of destruction managed by regular people? For that, we must turn to a mind as sharp as any weapon of his time, Kautalya, or you might know him as Chanakya. Now, he wrote a book, Arthashastra. Now, this wasn't just a boring rule book for ruling, it was a guide for using every bit of power a king had. And Kautalya knew the elephant was power. To control the elephant was to control the future of kingdoms. Therefore, he didn't just give a few tips, he built an entire system. And the top of the system was a person with huge responsibilities, the Hastyadhyaksha, the superintendent of elephants. Forget manager. This was the big boss of the elephant armies, and the Kautalya's guide for him, it was a less of a job description, but more like a super important duty with really tough goals. Now think about elephant forests. They weren't just any jungles, they were huge state protected safe zones for elephants, and they had a very strict no poaching rule. The punishment for harming a royal elephant or its home wasn't a like small fine, it was just death. Yeah, Kautalya wasn't building an empire by being soft. Then came the recruitment. An empire needs an elephant, and they don't just show up and ask for a job. Kautalya detailed the art of capture, huge operations needing hundreds of men, special enclosures, and the clever use of trained female elephants as decoys. Original, very large, very dangerous, high stakes, honey trap. Yeah. Success meant a new, confused giant for King's army. Failure meant, well, let's just say catching elephant had its risks. And once these giants were enlisted, then came the categorization. Now, this wasn't just sorting them by size. Kautalya, the master of small detail, demanded things to be exact. There were Sahanya, the war elephants, the steel fist of the army. Then came Apuahiya, the royal rides, the mount of kings and nobles, and of course the Valya, the rogue ones, the wild cards, maybe too fierce or untamable for normal duties. They needed very careful handling. One wrong move and your problem child could redecorate the capital. Then came the training. Now, training itself was a tough and careful science, and of course, Kautilya planned for this as well. His aim was to create living weapons. From Upasthana, like teaching battlefield discipline, the art of standing firm when things got crazy, to Samavartana, the quickness to turn, to move these mountains of flesh with deadly aim. Then came the Samayana, advancing in a perfectly timed formation. And then the serious skills of Vada, trampling, crushing, and finally Nagaryana, the special tactics for attacking forts, turning elephants into living wall breakers. The Mahavad, the keeper of elephants, wasn't just a rider, he was a warrior, an elephant psychologist, a lifelong partner to his giant, a bond of total trust built in discipline and shared danger. So Kautilya planned the system to raise, train, and use these living war machines. But how did this carefully controlled power actually do when the drums of war sounded? And when it faced the best armies and the most brilliant military leader the Western world had ever known? The answer would shake the very idea of how wars were won. That's coming up next. The true legend of Indian war elephant was not written in official papers. It was burned into history by fire, steel, and blood. The year is 326 BC. The place? The banks of the Hydaspes rivers in Punjab. Alexander the Great of Macedon, a name that meant victory. His army is like an unstoppable wave that had rolled across Asia. He arrives in India at the age of this new huge world, probably expecting another easy win. But King Porus, ruler of the Paura kingdom, had a different welcome ready. Not just men, not just horses. Porus unleashed his giants, a force of around 200 war elephants. Imagine the scene. For the Macedonian soldiers, men who had faced down the power of Persia, this was something new, something strange, something from a scary myth. These weren't just big animals. These were running fortresses with flesh and bone, covered in armor with warriors on top raining down death. Their tusks like spears. Their very presence a huge mental shock. The Macedonian horses, brave in many battles, reportedly lost their minds. They ran. The famous Greek army formations, the key to Alexander's victories, broke apart under the massive, crushing weight and the sheer, total terror of the elephant charge. Writers from Greece themselves tell of the destruction, the shock, the brutal power of these Indian war machines. It is said that this battle that played a big role in Alexander's troops finally saying, "Enough, we go no further." The Indian elephant, they didn't just fight a battle, they drew a line in history. A line that even Alexander the Great himself found too scary to cross. His dreams of conquering India stopped. And this power, this almost god-like greatness, wasn't just known on the battlefield. It was deeply part of the Indian spirit. Foreign visitors like Megasthenes at Chandragupta Maurya's court wrote with a total surprise, total awe about the thousands of royal elephants, their intelligence, their key role in showcasing the state's power. Chandragupta Maurya rumored to have 9,000 elephants. It wasn't just an army, it was a statement that this was an empire blessed by the gods, with riches and wisdom beyond belief. This was the real power play. So they were the tools of wars, symbols of unmatched glory, living proof of king's rule. But what was life like for these giants beyond the battlefield? And what happened when the very way wars were fought began to change? What happened to India's most famous four-legged war weapons? Now, life for a royal elephant when not busy with serious business of war was one of amazing display. They were the stars of grand royal shows, covered in priceless silks and jewels, carrying the king in decorated howdahs. Howdahs are the place where king and noblemen sat on the top of the elephant. The sight of these decorated giants moving with slow and sure majesty was designed to create an awe, to support the emperor's almost godlike status. And of course, our ancient temples, our sculptures, our paintings from Sanchi to Mahabalipuram, they are a proof of the elephant's respected place. Carved into stone, they hold up holy buildings, eternal symbols of strength, wisdom, and royal power. They weren't just animals, they were living monuments, a key part of both holy and everyday life in India. But, and with such power, there is always a but. Keeping this huge force, this living show of majesty, was a job of epic difficulty. The cost was enormous. Feeding, housing, and caring for thousands of elephants needed a big part of the state's money. And for all of their strength, they had weaknesses. A sudden fire, the unfamiliar roar of a new weapon, could scare even the most disciplined war elephant. And a scared elephant is a multi-ton wrecking ball with no steering wheel. Then slowly and surely the winds of change began to blow across the battlefields. New ways of fighting, faster horses, and then the thunder of a new god, gunpowder. A cannonball doesn't argue, it doesn't flinch, it simply arrives. The age of the elephant as the main decider of a battle, an age that had lasted for thousands of years, began its slow, certain decline. The living fortresses found itself beaten by these lifeless metal shot. So the elephant's rule as the ultimate weapon of war faded into the smoke of cannons. But when the battle cries died down, when the empires rose and fell on the strength of the new technologies, did India simply forget its giant friend? Or did the Hathi, the giant of history, find a new, perhaps even longer lasting destiny in the heart of nation? That's coming up next. Even as the roar of cannons replaced the trumpet of war elephant, India's bond with the Hathi did not break. It changed, it evolved, but it did not break. The elephant, mostly retired from its military career, found its importance growing, becoming even more deeply fixed as a symbol of culture, of heritage, of deep wisdom, and of our natural ancient link with the wild world. What lasted was not just a memory of its power, but the understanding of its spirit. The story of Indian elephants becomes a mirror, reflecting our own journey as people, showing our own changing values, our changing relationship with power, with nature itself, and with the deep, rich layers of our own history. It's a story of strength, yes, undeniably, but it's also the story of deep cultural respect and of an enduring shan that gunpowder could not wipe out. From a symbol of raw kingly power to a sign of nature's importance and national pride, it makes you reflect, doesn't it? On how we define power, how we see progress, and what our true duties are to these magnificent creatures that have shared this land with us for thousands of years. These ancient giants, who perhaps with their long memories and deep wisdom still carry the unspoken history within them. So, from the disciplined might of an emperor's army to a chaotic terror of a lone predator, next time on Wildlife in History, we journey into the dense mist-filled jungles of Kumaon, where entire valleys lived under a reign of silent, striped terror, and only one man who dared to hunt their hunter. It's a legendary thriller you won't want to miss. That was a truly colossal journey through the time with India's incredible elephants. There are always more to uncover, but that's our expedition for today. And remember, this season on Simply Wild, we have only just scratched the surface. From killer cats to forest ghosts, there's a whole world waiting to be uncovered. Keep exploring, keep wondering. If you enjoyed the story, make sure you hit follow or subscribe on whatever app you are using so you don't miss our next expedition, and keep it simply wild dosto. Until next time, this is your host Mansab, signing off. And hey, if you have a spare 30 seconds, leaving a rating or a review on a Spotify or Apple podcast is the single best way to help new listeners discover this show. It would mean world to me, and thank you for listening.